Are you a new or returning Diablo 4 player trying to get situated with the current state of the game? Well, in this video, I'm going to cover all the different systems in the game and guide you from character creation all the way to succeeding in the endgame. Let's jump right in. First off, you might wonder, what class should you be playing? Which ones are strong? Which ones are weak? Etc. Well, luckily for you, this may be the best balanced season for you to get into Diablo 4, as each and every Diablo 4 class in Season 9 is more than capable of clearing the most difficult content in the game and pushing pretty far in the most difficult content, which is the Pit of the Artificer. So with that being said, you can really be free to choose whatever you want to play and whichever class fantasy appeals to you. Now, you created your character and you want to know, what can I do in the game? How do I level up? Here you have multiple different approaches you can take. Personally, I love the world of Diablo, and if you want to get situated with its world, its stories, and its character, I do recommend starting off playing with the campaign. But if you want to skip that and jump right into the seasonal content, then there's a couple activities that can get you for 1 to 60. First off, I do recommend the seasonal story because it does lead you to one activity in the game, and that is Nightmare Dungeons. While you're playing, you will find these sigils that have their own special tab in your inventory, and upon using them, you will activate a Nightmare Dungeon. If you hit your map, you can click onto a highlighted dungeon and it'll teleport you right to it. Now, on the sigil itself, you'll see two things. One is a positive affix, like say Herodic Strong Room, or the best for you while leveling, Forgotten Wisdom, and a negative modifier, which will make the dungeon a little bit more difficult. Now, for leveling purposes, I do recommend you go with the Forgotten Wisdom sigils, if you will. What this does is when you kill monsters within this dungeon, they will drop these golden orbs, and upon collecting them, you'll get a very large experience boost. Also, in these Forgotten Wisdom dungeons, you will find a pool of wisdom, which gives you a 15% experience buff for 1 hour. So if you're logging into your first session of the day and want to level as fast as possible, I do recommend starting off by doing a Forgotten Wisdom Nightmare Dungeon and getting that experience buff. Also, by following the season story, you will unlock the seasonal mechanic, which are Herodic spells, and they could be quite powerful to assist you in giving you that edge to overcome content while you're leveling. And that being said, you get to choose different difficulties when starting out. If this is your first ARPG game, or if you have experience with either previous Diablo games or other games in the genre like Path of Exile or Last Epoch, I do recommend upping it a little bit to hard difficulty to increase the challenge. And each difficulty tier that you choose while leveling up will give you enhanced experience and gold rewards. And upon getting a little bit higher level, 2 more will unlock, and that is Expert and Penitent difficulty. Now, if you're playing on normal and things are a little bit too easy, that's when I'd recommend boosting the difficulty up, and you can change the difficulty at statues in Kyovashad and Karagar, which are 2 of the capital cities in the game. Now, outside of the seasonal story and the Nightmare Dungeons, there are a couple of open world activities you can partake in. If you look at your map, you'll see little icons called whispers, and these are essentially like different bounties, and if you go in that region, you'll have certain activities you need to carry out to complete those whispers. And upon completion, you'll be rewarded with experience, and you'll notice that a bar at the bottom of your map begins filling up. Once you complete 10 of these, you can turn them in for a great experience reward and a cache, either at the Tree of Whispers on your map or at a Raven in town. These caches are a fantastic way to earn experience, because not only will you gain experience when you complete these 10 whispers, but when opening the cache, you'll get a large boost as well. In fact, I know many players that collect these caches on their max level character, use them on an alt they want to level, and instantly get to level 60 depending on how many you use. Now, one of the best ways to complete whispers, and one thing that I recommend, is the Helltide activity. Helltides are a 45-minute long open world activity that rotate zones after the period concludes. Helltides can be identified on your map by seeing a reddened area with a ton of different whispers for you to conduct, including the Blood Maiden. Now, the Blood Maiden, when you're first starting out, can be quite difficult. So if you do approach to do her, I would just fight her conservatively and learn her moveset, as she can be a little bit tricky. Now, while you're accomplishing these whispers within Helltides, as you kill monsters, complete events, you will notice that you're collecting a currency called cinders. Upon reaching 75 cinders, you'll be able to open up mystery chests in the region. And these chests will give you a good experience boost as well as plenty of items. And also, another great open world activity that I personally love to do are the strongholds. Strongholds are cities or towns that have been overtaken by demons and other enemies. Each one has its own quest and storyline attached to it. Upon clearing out and completing a stronghold, denizens that were pushed out by these enemies will move back in, allowing you a new town, a new waypoint, and in some cases, a new dungeon. And this is important to do because upon completing strongholds and collecting waypoints, you earn something in that region called Renown. Now, when you press your map and you look at the top, you'll see a section called rewards, and you'll get rewarded depending on how much renown you gain per region. And this is very important because it's a way for you to unlock additional potions, additional skills, and additional Paragon points, which we'll get to in the endgame section. And now, a little tip while you're performing these activities: once you have unlocked elixirs or incense at the alchemist, I do recommend crafting them and using them. While they're active, both of them provide you different experience boosts that will stack up. So if you have an elixir, an incense, and if you get a pool of wisdom from the Forgotten Wisdom Nightmare dungeons that we spoke earlier about, that is a good boost for you if you're trying to level very quickly. Now, before we move on to the itemization section, if you are a new player and have a lot of questions or feel overwhelmed, be sure to hop on either my Discord or Twitch in the description below, because myself and my community are constantly helping new and returning players like yourself get situated in the game. Moving on to itemization, there are 6 tiers of items that you will find while leveling up and in the endgame. First off are common items whose text color appears white. These items just carry basic damage stats, basic armor, and do not have any additional properties to improve your character. The next tier are magic items, and their names appear in blue. Magic items start introducing affixes to your gear that can help improve your stats and damage you deal, such as additional primary stat like dexterity, strength, or int, depending on which class you play, health, and other properties. The next step up is rare. Rare items appear yellow in color and have 2 different affixes on them. And while leveling, these 2 items are going to be the most common that you get. The third type of item that you will start seeing here and there and are incredibly powerful are legendaries. Legendaries have an orange name attached to them, and they beam up into the sky when they do drop. Now, legendaries have 3 different affixes on them, and they have something called an aspect. An aspect will directly modify a particular skill or skill category to change how it works, deal more damage, or grant you a lot more defense. Now, say that you found a legendary item while you're leveling with an aspect that you really enjoy. Now, one thing to note about the itemization in Diablo 4 while you're leveling is that everything scales up as you level, including items. So the item level of an item that drops when you're level 1, you could have the exact same item drop at level 10, and it'll be more powerful because the drops are scaling up with your character. And by the way, the monsters also scale up in level as well. So if you are using a legendary item which has an aspect that you really enjoy, but you level up and you find a more powerful weapon, but it doesn't have that aspect anymore, fear not, thanks to a system called the Codex of Power. So what you can do is your old legendary item with the aspect you really like, you can salvage it at the blacksmith. Now that aspect that you salvage can be applied to any future item of the same type that you obtain. For example, say I had a bow with an aspect I liked, and I got a higher level bow with one I'm not too crazy about. I can salvage that original bow, get the aspect, and then I could go to a vendor called the Oculus, who is in every major city, and then use the imprinting tab to choose the more powerful item, and within my Codex of Power, I can select that aspect that I just salvaged and imprint it on there. So now you never have to worry about the different aspects on your legendaries when you're trying to upgrade your loot, because you can just salvage them and apply them on your latest gear. The great thing about this too is that if you do find legendaries with more powerful versions of those aspects, by salvaging them, your Codex of Power will upgrade the power of those aspects as well. And by the way, you could keep applying those aspects over and over. They are permanent once they're in your Codex of Power. And then next, you can get unique items. Unique items have 4 different affixes, and some of them can be unique, not appearing regularly on other types of items. And they also have really powerful and skill-changing aspects on them. Now, one thing to note about the unique items is that unlike legendaries, you cannot extract the unique affix. So if you want that affix, you need to have that unique item equipped. And lastly, you have your mythical unique items. Mythical unique items are purple when they drop and are the rarest type of item in the game. They have a very small chance of dropping during regular gameplay, but one thing that's great about them is that they can be equipped as early as level 35. So if you do find one, it'll make leveling and frankly a lot of endgame activities a breeze. Now, you can craft these weapons and do certain activities to give you a much higher chance of finding them, but we'll cover those in the endgame section. Next, we will talk about the game's crafting system. So while leveling up, there are 3 systems that you can interact with, and that is the blacksmith, the oculus, and the jeweler. With the blacksmith, you have the ability to temper your gear. And what this does, it allows you to enhance your skills on each piece of equipment, doing everything from increasing the size of your skills to even increasing the amount of projectiles your skills shoot upon casting. For example, a sorceress can add additional Hydra heads to her Hydras through tempering. Now, depending on the item slot, you have different types of tempers you can apply. Rings allow you to masterwork both offensive and resource recipes onto your item, and with a neck, you can apply any category of temper except for weapon. Now, one thing to note is that when you do select a temper category, you can choose from a number of different manuals. These manuals will drop in regular gameplay, but are most common to find in heraldic strong rooms, which are inside of nightmare dungeons, from different whisper caches you can get when you turn in those bounties we spoke about earlier, chests when you're doing the Helltides, among with other activities as well. Now, you will find different rarities of these manuals. So say that you're playing and you found a blue version of a manual and a yellow later. The yellow will upgrade the potency of those tempers within that manual, and these go up all the way to legendary. Now, if you do find a certain manual, another of the same type and rarity will no longer drop. So whenever you do see a manual drop on the ground, it means you don't have it yet, so be sure to pick it up and use it. Now, one thing to note about tempering is that there's only a finite number of tempers you can attempt on that item. So let's say that the manual you want to use have 4 different tempers that you can apply to your item. You can re-roll that manual multiple times to try and get the one that you want. And once those temper rolls are up, which will show at the bottom of your tempering window after each attempt, you can no longer temper that item. Now, in the end game, you have the opportunity to reset the tempers once on a particular item if you didn't get what you liked, but we'll cover that in the end game section. Now, another way to improve your gear is through the jeweler. You could add sockets to your gear here, with your helm, your chest, and your pants able to hold 2 sockets each, and your jewelry able to hold 1. If you have a 2-handed weapon, that can also hold 2 sockets, but otherwise a one-hander and offhand, each of those could hold onto 1. At the jeweler, you can craft gems from fragments you earn throughout different activities in the game that can enhance both offensive and defensive skills depending on the type of gem that you do craft. And then thirdly, you have the occultist. So we did mention imprinting and the Codex of Power in the itemization section, but another thing you can do is you can enchant an item. So say that you got an item that has an affix that you don't really like. So one thing you can do is you can choose one of those affixes and you have the ability to enchant it. Enchanting allows you to replace one affix on an item with another, but note that you can only do this with one affix, and once you choose the affix, you cannot change your mind and select a different one. So before you enchant an item, be sure that you selected the right affix that you do want to change so that you don't accidentally choose the wrong one. Unlike tempering, you could keep enchanting an affix on your item infinitely as long as you have the resource and gold to do so. This will allow you to, one, get the affix that you're looking for and roll it in the highest range possible if you're really trying to maximize the potential of that item. Now, moving on to your skills. As you level up, you will get points in your skill tree. And as you spend points in your skill tree, you'll unlock additional branches. Each branch has different abilities and passive skills you can choose from. What I would recommend is taking a look at your skills ahead of time, and if there's a specific category of skills you enjoy the most, consider choosing one skill from each category aligning with the gameplay style that you're aiming for. For example, if I'm playing a necromancer and I enjoy the shadow build, I may consider choosing one shadow skill per category, and then after that, choosing specific passive that can improve that style of gameplay for me. And in the second to last tree, you can unlock an ultimate for use. Ultimates are incredibly powerful skills that are on a relatively long cooldown. So feel free to experiment with those and see which one's most fun and effective for your build. And lastly is a key passive. A key passive is an essential skill to really elevate the build that you're trying to aim for. So again, if I am wanting to be a shadow necromancer, I would want to choose one that complements those abilities. Now, of course, this approach to choosing skills is for starters who aren't too familiar with all the different synchronization and complexities of these skills. But once you get a little bit more comfortable, start looking through the different skills and passives to see what makes more sense. And also say that you get particular uniques or aspects that interact with some of these different skills. Feel free to click into the respec mode and you could move your skills around to maximize the use of those unique or legendary items. Also, say that you feel like you aren't doing enough damage or you're dying too quickly. There is a keyword search within the skill tree that allows you to focus in on certain categories. So if you are looking for, say, damage reduction and you wanted to filter based on that, you can choose that category in the search and it'll highlight the different damage reduction skills for you. With that, we are moving on to the end game. Congratulations, you've hit level 60. Now, what the heck do you do? You've completed the story, you've completed the season journey, and you've reached the max level. Or have you? First off, we will talk about Paragon levels. Once you hit level 60, you'll notice that you've unlocked a completely new skill tab and your experience bar is starting again from level 1, but now it's blue. Welcome to the Paragon System. So once you hit level 60, you have 300 more levels to gain, and each Paragon point you gain can be used in a new skill tree called the Paragon board. Now, upon first look, and frankly, even I sometimes when I look at it, I can be quite overwhelmed. You have a starter board with many different nodes on it. And if you notice, you'll see that in the middle of the first board, there is an empty node slot. So first off, let's talk about glyphs. Glyphs are nodes that you can place inside your Paragon board that drop from different activities. You could find them from completing whispers, from chests within Helltides, from nightmare dungeons, and the pit, which is also a new endgame activity I'll speak in depth about a little bit later on. So upon getting these glyphs, you can insert them into your board, and they have certain specific abilities that will enhance your offensive or defensive categories. Typically, to come online, they're dependent on you selecting certain amount of nodes around that glyph node. For example, you might need a certain amount of intelligence purchase in range to get that additional bonus, or other primary stats. So when you are planning out your Paragon board, make sure you pay attention to those stat nodes around the glyph socket to optimize the glyph that you want to best put in there. And then once you reach the end of a board, you get something called a board attachment gate. And upon selecting this, you have the choice of selecting multiple different boards, and your Paragon can have a maximum of 5 boards. So this is a complicated system with many different customization options. But what I would recommend you do is look at the current skills that you're using, the different uniques and how they interact with your skills, and look at the legendary nodes that are being highlighted when you're selecting one of these boards, and see which ones are most complementary to the skills that you have. Or maybe there are certain boards that have cool skills that you want to find items to build around for. That's another way to select a board. And once you do, what I recommend doing is finding the most efficient route, first off, to the glyph socket node and then the legendary node. And once you do that, you can look around and you will see you have rare and magic nodes that have powerful defensive and offensive properties. So once you've found the quickest route for your glyph socket and your legendary, start looking around at those complementary magic and rare nodes and see which ones you want to branch out to. Also, there are some glyphs which enhance the strength of magic and rare nodes. So maybe if you find a board that has a lot of magic and rare nodes around the glyph socket, consider placing that glyph there. If you've been following the season's story, so you understand the Paragon system now, and what the heck can you do? In the endgame, you have unlocked additional activities and difficulty levels that you can conduct. The first, and very important to understand, is the pit. We spoke about glyphs earlier, and with glyphs, you can level them up all the way to level 100. And to do so, you need to be able to climb the levels of the pit. To enter the pit, you need to go to Karagar, and to the top left of the waypoint, you will find the Artificer's Obelisk, which is a portal activator. Clicking on that, you need a currency called Artificer Stone, which is very easy to get as you conduct different activities in the endgame, and you're able to select a tier of the pit to start with. And this is very important to understand, as you need to climb these tiers to be able to access the highest difficulties in the game. And this is important because torment difficulties give you access to brand new items, new legendary aspects, including their highest possible ranges in the Codex of Power. Also, torment difficulties elevate some previous activities that we spoke about, like Helltides as well as Nightmare Dungeons. Now, when you do look to select a tier, you'll see which tier corresponds to which difficulty. So when you first hit 60, the highest difficulty that you're able to select is Penitent. Now, if you're able to complete a pit tier 10, you'll unlock the Torment 1 difficulty. And going further down from there, completing a 25 unlocks Torment 2, completing a 40 unlocks Torment 3, and completing a 55 unlocks Torment 4. So to be able to take on a Torment 1 tier 10 pit, I would recommend that now you're level 60, be sure to do activities in the game to get the highest item level gear now that your level is capped. Items will drop at an item level of 750 at level 60. And then once you unlock Torment, you have a chance to get Ancestral legendary gear. Ancestral gear is item level 800, and one of your affixes will now have a star next to it. This is called a greater affix. A greater affix automatically rolls the max value for that stat, and it's multiplied by an additional 25%. You're actually able to get up to 4 greater affixes on a piece of gear, and those pieces are the rarest items of all. Ideally, you want to gear up to the point that you have greater affixes and item level 800 and all pieces of your gear to attack the highest difficulties in the game. Now, outside of the pit, Helltides now have a lot more options available to you in terms of the chests. The Chest of Mystery is still available, but it's now a whopping 250 cinders, and the rewards you get it are significantly better. And also, regarding the escalating nightmare dungeons, the sigils will now allow you to go further and fight Astaroth after completing 3 different dungeons within that escalating sigil. He is quite difficult, so be sure you're prepared where you're going in to face him. Next, we'll talk about the boss ladder. The boss ladder is an endgame only activity that allows you to take on different bosses which have specific loot tables. This is a fantastic way for you to target farm specific unique items that you'd like for your builds. Now, there are 3 different tiers of bosses on this ladder. There are the entry bosses, who are the Beast in the Ice, Lord Zir, Grigor, and Varshan. So each of these bosses can be summoned for free, but upon defeating them, they'll drop a cache. For you to unlock this cache and gain that boss's loot, you will need 12 materials specifically required to summon those bosses. Varshan requires malignant hearts, which can drop throughout different activities in the world, as well as certain monsters that will spawn after completing different events. So make sure you stick around if you see a malignant heart icon appear on your minimap. I believe they're called grotesque debtors. Lord Zir requires vials of blood. Beast in the Ice requires distilled fear, which typically drops the most from nightmare dungeons. Grigor requires living steel, which is most easily gotten from Helltide chests. Now, each of these bosses, when you loot their caches, will actually drop more boss materials for that next tier of bosses, and that's what we call the Uber bosses in the ladder. The Uber bosses are Tyrael, the Lord of Sin, one of the lesser evils, and Tyrael, the Maiden of Anguish, another one of the lesser evils. Now, when you loot a boss's cache, there is a chance for Belial to spawn, and upon defeating Belial, he will drop another type of boss mat called Betrayer's Husk, and this is used to summon the super Uber boss, who is the most rewarding in the game, and that is Belial, the Lord of Lies. Upon defeating Belial, you can loot his cache, and the great thing about him is you can select the cache of any previous boss if you're trying to target farm. And the reason why you would want to do this when selecting Belial is that, especially for those starter bosses like Lord Zir, it drops a lot more items from that boss and has a higher chance at getting you a greater affix on them. So if you're really trying to min-max your gear, Belial is the way to do so. Also, these Uber bosses and Belial are the greatest chance in the game to get a mythic unique item. They're still rare, but if you do enough of these boss runs, you will eventually get one to drop. Now, another activity that you can do in the endgame is called the Infernal Hordes. The Infernal Hordes is one of my favorite activities because it is all about slaying a whole bunch of demons. In here, you get 10 different waves, each a minute long, where demons absolutely swarm you. There are mini activities that appear when you kill enough normal demons that have a certain objective, and upon clearing these objectives, you will get a currency called Aether. The strategy here is to collect as much Aether as possible for that once you complete the Infernal Horde, you could cash in as many wards as possible. Now, after each wave, you get to choose a modifier to both make the waves more difficult and grant more Aether. Now, at the end of these waves, you get to fight the Fell Council, which, if you're a Diablo fan, you'll recognize the same council members from the Treven Call in Diablo 2, who were guarding Mephisto's lair in the Durance of Hate. Upon defeating them, you're able to open a greater equipment chest, which is frankly the only way to guarantee a greater affix legendary item to drop. Also, the Infernal Hordes have uniques that are health themed that will only drop in that activity. Once you get that cash, which you could only loot once, you could spend the rest on either gold or materials. Personally, I recommend materials. And the reason for that is because you've unlocked a new crafting mechanic and that is Masterworking. Masterworking, next to tempering, is also a way to improve your items at the blacksmith. Masterworking allows you to upgrade an item upwards of 12 times, with each level improving all the affixes on your item by 5%. So if you do it 12 times, you're improving all your affixes by 60%, significantly improving the strength of your items. So if you are struggling getting further in the pit or taking on a specific boss in the ladder, be sure to masterwork your items to give you the edge. Also, every 4 masterworking levels will randomly select one affix or temper to improve by an additional 25%. Now, if you're absolutely min-maxing and trying to push as far as possible in the pit, then very dedicated and hardcore players will try and roll 3 on the same affix for a particular item to maximize their item's strength. Now, this is very difficult to do and requires a lot of material called Obdicite, which you can get a lot of in Nightmare Dungeons and in the materials cache at the end of Infernal Hordes. And 2 other activities you can do are on a timer in the open world, one being world bosses. World bosses spawn, I believe, once every 3 hours, and they're on a rotation of 3 different bosses: Wandering Death, Ashava, and Avarice. If you kill each one of these once a week, you'll be rewarded the Grand Cache, which has some great loot. Also, say that you're masterworking gear and you're running out of certain materials like veiled crystals or forgotten souls. You can complete Legion events, which will greatly reward you with those materials when they appear. Now, if you're a new player, this should get you well situated and have a basic understanding of all the different systems and activities in the game, from level 1 all the way into the endgame. You may ask yourself, however, as to whether or not it's worth playing if you don't have the Vessel of Hatred expansion. Well, thankfully, every system I explained to you is in the base game of Diablo 4, and the seasonal powers as well as escalating nightmare dungeons are available in the base game as well. That being said, let's briefly touch upon what you'll get in the expansion. First off, you do have the new class, the Spiritborn, which is expansion only. Also, we spoke about Renown earlier. There is a new zone called Nahantu, which can grant you 2 additional skill points, a potion, as well as additional Paragon levels. So you will be missing out on those if you don't have Vessel of Hatred. Not the end of the world, but it is something that you should be aware of. Also, if you don't have Vessel of Hatred, you will not have access to runes, which are new items to further customize and enhance your characters, and they can be quite powerful. You can also use runes to specifically craft mythic uniques that you're trying to chase for. This is the only way outside of chance drops to specifically target a mythic unique item. Beyond this, you do have an activity called the Undercity, which allows you to farm specific materials via currency called Tribute that you can feed into the activity. And then there's the only raid or multiplayer only activity in the game called the Dark Citadel. Also, mercenaries, which can be beneficial, are also only available with the expansion. Lastly, we did speak about the boss ladder. Urivar and the Harbinger of Hatred, a starter boss and an uber boss, are only available for Vessel of Hatred expansion players. If you want a deep dive into any one of these systems, comment on what you want to hear more about below, and I'll be sure to craft up another video guide for you. Thank you all for watching. If you want to see more videos like these, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing to support the channel. And also, where I go live Monday through Friday, if you need any help, I'm constantly doing community runs, helping you all level up, providing items if you need them, and providing free Belial runs with my own materials. So I hope to see you there, and thank you so much for watching the video. Until next time.